going to Stanford and spending all this money, and spending all this time to become someone I could have become before Stanford, it's actually stupid.
So, hi, Olga. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Sophie Tivo. I am the teaching assistant for Introduction to Entrepreneurship and Innovation. And today I'm joined by.
My name is Carter. I'm a junior here at Purdue, and I'm majoring in construction management.
I'm Aryan. I'm a freshman here at Purdue, and I'm studying data science.
My name is Jessica Jittu, and I'm a sophomore in aerospace engineering, and it's really, really great to meet you today.
Yes, so it's a pleasure and privilege to have the opportunity to speak with you today and ask you about your experience as a venture capitalist. So before we get into our list of questions, we would love to hear a little bit about where your interest in venture capital began and the series of events that kind of led you to this point in your career.
Yeah. First of all, nice to meet you all of you. My interest in venture capital, actually, I've never been interested in venture capital for the sake of interest in venture capital. I just think that venture capital as an asset class had a disproportionate impact on the speed at which the world changed and innovated in the last several decades. And for a very long time, actually, until I started the J curve, for some reason, I thought that I was incapable of being an entrepreneur. And the second best, if not being an entrepreneur, to me would be an early stage venture capital, because you basically get exposure to brilliant people pursuing wild dreams, and you can be part of their journey, and you can pick the industries in which you want to help and support those entrepreneurs. And I just thought that it fits my personality and fits my ambitions, and it fits the scale of my interests. And I got into venture capital actually in 2008 back in Russia. I was really lucky to be on the team that was a super early investor in Evernote. And it actually created a really great platform for me to start, because my first experience in venture capital was very successful. Back then, the fund was probably the only fund in Russia that returned substantial amount of capital. And from then on, I just decided that this is the industry where I want to be. And in 2013, I got to the point when I decided that I don't really believe in the playbook that existed in Russia. And why don't I just go and create my own playbook? Why don't I just become an entrepreneur in venture capital and build my own conviction and build my own thesis and try to sell this idea to as many people as I can and see if they bet on me and my business partner? And that's what I did in 2013. Our thesis was enterprise software, deep tech that could leverage the access to cheap and highly efficient R&D in Russia. That's where I'm coming from. That's where my business partner was coming from. And that was our strength. And with that thesis, we built the fund. And at the same time, I had a luxury of joining Techstars as a mentor and starting Angel Invest. So I had this different perspective of investing as someone who had like thesis-driven portfolio approach versus Angel, where I could be a little bit more personal, a little bit more risky, a little bit more personality-driven. Yeah, and I think that appetite for risk and appetite for working with people who are brilliant and who make the most impossible or maybe improbable things come true, it just never stopped.
Thank you. We appreciate the honesty because wasn't expecting that, honestly. But yeah, everyone has their own unique journey, and it's awesome that you found yourself in a niche where you like love what you do now. It's an inspiring story for everyone else. I'll let Carter take it away with the next question then.
Yeah, so we all have lists of questions, and we'll probably just go around one by the other and just ask them to you. So the first question I have is, in this ever-changing world of technology and innovation, how do you stay on top of emerging trends and things that are going to come into today's world? And then are there any specific publications or practices that you would recommend for aspiring entrepreneurs like ourselves?
I actually read the questions. I thought the questions were really smart. And I was thinking about the trends. I just think the trends are such a distraction because they change so fast. You had like crypto trend and Web3. Now it's AI. Tomorrow it might be crypto again. So I think if you purely try to stay on top of the trends, that's everything that you're going to be doing. There will be no time left for anything else. I think the most important thing among this multitude of trends is to find your own framework for understanding what is that something that will be relevant 10 years from now or more, and find your personal why. Because if you build a conviction around something that you believe will be true and you find a way to analyze this opportunity from different perspectives, that would be the best way to stay on top of something that is really important and not to be distracted with something that is not. And now, in terms of resources, I think every generation has some opinion leaders and thought leaders. And I think there's a number of people who are exceptional at what they do, and they were right more frequently than other people were. Like for me, there are few venture capitalists that I personally follow. I just think they're brilliant, like Jeremy Levine, for example, from Bessemer. Those people are mostly very low profile, but I think when you find people who you think are thought leaders, whose opinion resonates with you, you just need to follow them. You just need to find, podcasts they participate, books they write, or, newsletters or, opinion pieces, and just consume as much as you can. But I will definitely work on creating like the heat map of people who you think are important based on your perception of the long-term trends, because there's so much crap available and everybody's an influencer today, and separating what's actually an important thought leadership versus temporary influence, that really helps as well. Jeremy Levine, Fred Wilson, I think those guys are great.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, with the influential world and everything like that, I just know a bunch of people around me, especially up here at school, that I feel like they start to influence people more and more on social media. And it's crazy because they're just same people my age and everything, and then have a bright future ahead of them. So I'm going to pass it on to the next person.
Yeah. Also, what you said about the trends changing really fast, that's something that's very important and that we should keep in mind. So moving on to the second question, can you provide insights into your preferred capital structure for early stage startups? Also, how do you view the balance between equity financing, debt financing, and other sources of capital to ensure sustainable growth and financial stability in the companies that you have invested in?
I think the most important thing is the type of business that you're running. There are certain industries where, like debt, for example, is more relevant than equity. If you're a capital intense business and you need like large amounts of cash, it's cheaper to get them through debt. But in general, in early stage, I think convertible notes or SAFE is the preferred instrument just because it's so cheap. It's really cheap for founders. The simpler, the better, the less restrictions, the less provisions you put in the document, the better, because normally the first round of capital is the most founder friendly and it will only get worse from there. So I'd say that if you're a venture capitalist, unless you're leading around, unless you're putting like, I don't know, $1 million, $2 million, $3 million in your own cash, then as simple as better. If you are putting a substantial amount of capital in a multi-million dollar round, obviously you want to draft shareholder agreement and you get like board observer or board seat because it's a lot of capital. But normally, if it's a startup that's raising up to $1.5, $2 million first round of capital, SAFE or convertible note.
Yeah, so you have a really impressive track record when it comes to like backing startups like early. For example, I think you mentioned like Evernote, and then another one I think we found was ClassPass. And so I kind of just wanted to ask, what specific qualities or criteria do you really look for when you're deciding to invest in like a startup, and how has that like changed over time?
Yeah, I think, well, it's really subjective, but I think things like when you think about successful founders, and not just in my portfolio, but on average, I think they're really obsessed with what they do. And I think in general, there's a certain story behind like why you decided to do what you're doing. And the more personal and the more deep the story, the more valuable people get into, explaining why they're doing what they're doing, the higher the chances that these people will persist when things go south. And this is super important. I think another important quality is, can they build a team? Because it's really hard to build and pivot a startup if you can't surround yourself with people who are better than you. And there are certain founders who really cannot stand the competition within within the company. And you can actually see it by talking to the co-founders, understanding the co-founders dynamic, understanding the dynamics with early employees. You can see how founders operate. This is really important. And the other thing, I think, is just the approach towards scaling business, because sometimes you talk to the founders and they say, oh, yeah, we will close this round and then we will do that. I think a lot of founders, when you talk to them, they make everything they do subject to the round, which I think is wrong, because the good founders, they just, round is a good thing to have. It's not must have. And they rarely make their success and success of their business subject to somebody else's belief in them and financial bet on them. And I think lastly, great founders are really greedy. They are long-term greedy to the extent that all of these things that, startups are raising money at crazy valuations to get a tech crunch, that is not something that a good founder would do, because good founders understand the multi-stage nature of venture capital. And they understand that if today they're raising at like 100x their ARR multiple, tomorrow they will have to find a way to grow into that. And if they can't, then there's a huge risk of, down round and various associated provisions. And I think good founders really long-term greedy. They will raise just enough at the valuation that they think they would be able to justify. And this is like nitty-gritty details, but when you talk to them and you try to understand how they think about the next like 18 months, 24 months, there's a big correlation between the amount of capital they raise, the valuations, and their operational plan.
Thank you.
That's awesome. Second question I have for you: what would you say your investment philosophy is? And how would you say that it has evolved over time with all the different roles that you've had throughout your entrepreneurship and venture capitalist journey?
I'll tell you how it evolved, and then I'll tell you the philosophy. How it evolved. When I got into venture capital, I really wanted to prove myself. I really wanted to be part of US VC industry, Silicon Valley, and all this stuff. It sounded really cool. I wanted to be, one of those cool people wearing Patagonia jackets, bragging about deals and so on and so forth. It was like ego. But at the same time, the more time I spent in the industry and the more I mature as a person in the industry, the more I understand that that actually really doesn't excite me. That what excites me way more is whether or not things that I'd say the older you become, the more time becomes an asset. And I think when you think about time as the main asset, you want to think about how you spend it. And I decided that I'm not interested in spending my time on hunting down the startups who are perceived cool as in the industry because, they went to Stanford, they went to Harvard, or, they dropped out of Stanford or Harvard. I decided that to me, way more important is the time that I'm investing into supporting this specific person in this specific industry drives some form of the positive change in the world. And I think to connect it with how I think about investing, I'm not investing in tech for the sake of tech. Like I'm not investing in AI. I'm not investing in, I don't know, enterprise software. I'm investing in solving a big market problem. And then the question I'm answering, like, first of all, is the problem that is being addressed really big and really important for a lot of people? And the second question becomes, can this problem be solved faster through technology? And if it can be solved, can these guys make it happen? Are they the right people for that? So the investment philosophy comes into thinking about what impact you as an investor drive for the people who are suffering. You take healthcare, you take education, you take security. And that's a big reason why, for example, I'm not that much investing in the US and I'm investing way more and spending more time in Latin America because the problems are bigger. And it's easier to feel good about solving them because you do a little thing and that already drives huge impact. And here you do a lot, like you spend 18 hours like working in New York, betting on startups in New York, you see this impact. You spend 18 hours in Sao Paulo working with startups in Sao Paulo, you see like how, the huge change happened right away. So the philosophy is the bigger the problems, the better. The more I'm able to drive a positive change for a bigger portion of population, the happier I feel about what I'm doing. That's kind of it.
That's awesome.
Your perspective has been really, really great. And I think your philosophy is very interesting. So moving on to the second question that I have for you is on October 17th of 2021, you wrote an article on the Medium in which you outlined steps as an entrepreneur should to take to avoid common pitfalls. And you just mentioned that you started a lot of interest in Latin American countries such as Brazil and Colombia. What are some common pitfalls that you see in these startups? And what do you think is the catalyst behind such a pattern?
Yeah, I'm actually mostly can probably speak about Brazil because I spent like, I don't know, a lot of people think that I'm Brazilian at this point, but I don't speak the language. But I think the biggest surprise for me, when I started working, first I started as an advisor and then I started investing in Brazil. But I think the biggest surprise was how people think about failure and that failures are being really personal. And to me, it was really hard to reconcile the nature of technology where the rate of failure is really, really high with the perception of failure in the society. And I think this personalization of failure, it really forces entrepreneurs to take lesser of the risk than they should be taking otherwise. And that pushes them to build more of companies that are solving their local needs versus something that has a potential. I think the biggest difference between entrepreneurs that create business, like tech businesses in the US and tech businesses in Brazil, is the scale of their ambition. People in the US dreaming big and create something that would, everybody wants to build a legacy, right? And in Brazil, people want to solve a very specific problem. I think that that's the biggest thing. You don't allow yourself to dream big because if you fail, society will judge you. So I think that's the biggest, just the scale of ambitious, locality of mindset.
That's really interesting. I just kind of want to tie in my next question back into like what you said about investing being subjective. And I think when in looking in your articles, especially, that's something that's really evident. And I kind of want to bring up a different article, which is called "Are You Thinking Independently or is the Crowd Thinking for You?" And so, can you provide an example of a situation where you kind of resisted this temptation to follow the crowd and you kind of made more of a independent investment decision? And like, what was exactly the outcome of that decision?
I think in general, I do not like the crowd, period. It's just my stubborn personality that if everybody is doing this thing, I will go and do exactly the opposite. That helps really, but it's been my interpersonal quality for most of my life. But I think the herd mentality is actually, it's really hard to resist. And the only way to resist it is to understand kind of setting up the set of rules for yourself to make a decision. How do you make a decision and what influences your decision? When you feel that you're urged to make this decision without having a clear why, then that's the sign of herd mentality. When you are running after a train because everybody is in the train already, that's the sign of the herd mentality. So this is one thing. I think the second most important thing is that when you do invest at the top of the market, your returns go down. Because when you pair high valuation with the risk of failures, you would not be able to deliver money to your LPs. And I don't believe that I'm the level of Sequoia or the level of Benchmark to the extent that I can screw up many times and people will still bet on me. The way I think about myself, I think that I am at day zero. I'm building myself and I need to be very thoughtful in terms of how I think about returns. And if I switch from the mode of careful analysis of opportunities to gambling because there are other people in the cap table, that's when I will not be able to deliver these returns. So my personal rule is if everybody is investing in a certain industry, today it's AI, I'm not going to invest in AI. I'm going to sit down and wait. And yes, I'm probably an idiot. I'm probably missing out on the opportunities. But when you set it up as a rule, it makes it easy to say no. Anything hyped, I'm not investing. I'm going to actually look at the opposite side. I'm going to spend a lot of time trying to understand what are the adjacent industries that would benefit from the hype that is happening long term and would try to build expertise in it. So today, for example, when you think about areas I'm interested in, it's all this integration of legacy systems. AI is really accelerating processes a lot. And when you think about, for example, large enterprise, they have a lot of these different platforms that are somewhat connected or disconnected. And is there a way to integrate them without substituting them through the power of AI? That's one of the topics I'm thinking about. I haven't made a single investment, but that's something that I'm entertaining with, trying to separate myself from hype. And in general, all the investments, like this company, Tortuga Logic, I backed in 2015. It's a hardware cybersecurity company. I was actually the first institutional investor there from my first fund, and DARPA matched the capital. Nobody believed in the hardware cybersecurity because nobody believed that hardware might be hacked. The way I thought about that, for example, it was the period when IoT devices and the interconnectedness of IoT devices grew really, really fast. And when you kind of pair this rapid growth of connected devices with commoditization of antivirus, like software security market, you understand that there is an opportunity there. Would it be, an opportunity on a hardware level? I don't know. That was a bet. But the opportunity was at the intersection of two trends. One trend, which was already saturated, and the second trend that was clearly emerging and that was penetrating the most conservative part of the stack, which was enterprise. And in general, when I invest in something that has to be some sort of really strong maturing trend and a really strong decaying trend. Like another example would be this company that I recently backed called Sunny, an elderly healthcare space in Brazil. And the reason why I think it's super interesting is because you have this like huge percentage of aging population who have a lot of money and who have absolutely no infrastructure around them. Because at least in the US, you can, place your elderly people in this like senior living houses, and culturally in Brazil, with 216 million people population, it's not acceptable. So what do you do with all these aging people? And it's always something like this. It requires a lot of thinking and a lot of hypothesizing. So thinking is like, I love to think and I do that a lot. And I prefer to think about long-term trends versus who invests in AI or NFT, or is it like, are we back to Web 3.0? So long answer to your question.
I'd like to tie it back into a couple questions that you've talked about earlier and everything like that, a couple answers and your introduction. So how exactly did you get into investing in Latin America? And then what challenges have you had with investing in a region like that opposed to somebody who'd be investing in a separate region?
So I'll give you an answer. I'll actually give you an anecdote that is somewhat connected to the last question also in your question list in terms of the advice for you as the future investors and entrepreneurs. I went to Stanford, I went to business school, and I was lucky enough to attend this class called Path to Power by Professor Jeffrey Pfeffer. He's an incredible tenure professor. He's an older guy, like really direct. So I attended his first class. I was super impressed. It was about non-traditional ways of succeeding in corporate environment. And I was like so pumped after the class. And I was standing in front of the Coupa Cafe, which is like a cafe on campus, talking to a friend of mine. And I see him walking towards me, like really slowly. And he stops by me and he looks at me. He's like, I'm very curious about you. What is that you want to do after Stanford? And I told him, like, I don't know, maybe, join Sequoia or like maybe A16Z or whatever. And he gives me this look, and then he pauses for a second. And then he looks at me again. He's like, why would someone as intelligent as you would do such a stupid thing? And I was like looking at him and asking, like, what do you mean? Like, what is stupid about that? He's like, why would someone as intelligent go and slave for someone else and do something at the borderline of mediocrity here in Silicon Valley? You guys, the biggest problem with all of you, with all of these graduates here, is that you saturate the knowledge even further. When instead of doing that, what you want to do is you want to take this knowledge and bring it somewhere where it's not that accessible and not that available. That's the biggest favor that you can do to this organization, to this institution, and to yourself personally. And I was reflecting, in that conversation. And I realized that it's actually really stupid because going to Stanford and spending all this money, and spending all this time to become someone I could have become before Stanford, it's actually stupid. So I decided I'm actually going to do something that is completely different and completely out of my comfort zone that has an intersection of my prior experience because I've been investing in emerging markets. I am from emerging markets. And I'm going to do it in my way. I'm going to try to do something using Stanford logo, but in my way. And that's how I ended up in Latin America. I decided that I want to focus on a big emerging market. I had a big set of constraints. I didn't want to do any market that has a very strong centralization of power, like, for example, Mexico or Russia, where if everything goes right, everybody's happy. But then, one country chooses to attack another country and the business collapses. Like, I didn't want to do that. I also didn't want to do small markets because my experience in Southeast Asia was that as a region, it seems big, but it's really fragmented. And every market has a very different culture, very different mentalities. And when you kind of cross-check all of these constraints, there's very few markets left. And Brazil, with 216 million population, was one of those markets. And half of my class were Brazilians. And Brazil is an unbelievably diverse country. Like, when you look at the country, it actually reminds you more of the United States than anything else because you have very European population in the south. You have very Portuguese population in Rio. Then you have people from everywhere in Sao Paulo. And the list goes on and on and on. Like, everyone can be a Brazilian if you guys speak Portuguese. Any one of you sitting here could be a Brazilian. Largest population of Italians outside of Italy, largest population of Japanese people outside of Japan. It's all in Brazil. So I traveled there in between classes. I did a huge research paper on the market. But I think all the things that I got to know, there's like half of the population below the age of 35, 12 tech unicorns, 6 out of 10 founders of unicorns are actually non-Brazilians at all. They moved to the country and they built for the country. 90% WhatsApp penetration. Second largest market for Facebook, Google, TikTok outside of main markets. And it's a homogeneous population. They all speak the same language, digitally native. Like, smartphone penetration is 98%. So there are all these factors that make it really interesting. And it also make it kind of, if you're willing to fly there and build trust there, barriers to entry that you create are huge because majority of VCs don't want to leave their own zip code, not even saying about, spending half their time in a brand new big market and trying to adapt culturally. So yeah, those are the reasons. But plus, when you just look at from the returns perspective, an average return of a VC firm in the US is 1.5x cash on cash. An average return in Brazil is over 6x. And returns of the funds in Brazil are way more equally distributed. In the US, it's like Sequoia, Benchmark, Bessemer right here with returns of 15x, and then everybody else is deeply negative. So on average, it gives you 1.5x.
It seems like you did a really vast research on Brazil, and Brazil has way too many anecdotes to itself. Even agriculturally, they're so forward. I guess this is part of you saying that you wanted to be different and go to places where nobody else has been before. So speaking more about that, you've definitely encountered various creative, innovative, and like passionate founders. Can you share a story about any startup or entrepreneur whose journey or vision left an impact on you and how that might have influenced your own perspective?
The most recent example would be the guy who came to my podcast, Eduardo Della Maggiora. He's a founder of Chilean unicorn Betterfly. And it's actually, when you think about it, it's a crazy company. It's a first social unicorn from Latin America. And the company that became a unicorn in less than 3 years since inception. They today operate in like 8 markets. The guy lives in Miami. And on top of running this really fast growing company, he's 2 times world Ironman champion runner-up. And I think he just got back from Hawaii again. Like, his routine is ridiculous. And his career, his journey overall, like, is pretty exciting. He was a very successful banker at JP Morgan in New York when his mother got sick with cancer. And his father died when he was 16. And he had to completely rethink his life and get into finance. to support his family. And that's how he actually ended up in JP Morgan in New York City. And when his mother got sick, it kind of brought all these memories, and he decided that he needs to rethink his life. And his big question was like, he told me, like, I was walking one day from my home to my office, and I was thinking, like, what if I got hit by a bus right this moment? What did I create in this world? Like, what will I be remembered for? And he realized that he could not find an answer. And when he tried to think about that again and could not find an answer, he decided that maybe that's the moment when you need to go and create an impact. And that's when he quit JP Morgan and he went to Africa to volunteer in school in Tanzania. He taught math and English to children in Tanzania. And basically, after that, he went on and founded this life insurance platform in Chile to help people feel good about their weight and, give back through being healthy and getting a better terms on life insurance. And we were sitting with him and he was like, one big question I always ask people, what is your dream? And he's like, normally I get some kind of an answer like, oh, I want to buy a penthouse, or I want to buy this, or I want to buy this. And he's like, it's been a second since I last time met a person who dreamed about something unachievable. Because majority of people dream about things that we can actually have. If you work hard, we can't have them. Like everybody can buy a penthouse if they are smart and work 18 hours a day and save, and all this stuff. But dreaming about something that is really highly improbable and then becoming a person who can achieve those dreams, this is really rare. And he got me thinking about my own dream. And I realized that I actually don't have it. I am one of those people who dream about things that we can make happen. It's more like a deferred plan versus a dream. And I think this perception and this different way of looking at your life and different way of going and making things happen and driving an impact and overcoming your own constraints, this is something that I've been pondering with a lot after that conversation, for sure.
Wow, yeah. Thank you. I kind of want to just go back to investing in startups again. And I know you mentioned about like how you invest in the team side of the people in the startup. And now I kind of want to ask, how do you assess the scalability and market potential of a startup when considering to invest in it? And like, are there specific strategies or like market analysis techniques that you rely on to like gauge long-term profitability beyond personal interest?
There are two different camps of thought. One thought is let's put the market. It's all about the market and the size of the market, right? Total addressable market. And the other camp is it's all about the founder. So in my perspective, that is actually all about the founder, because I've seen too many founders pivoting from one market to another, from B2C to B2B, all of this stuff. Personally, I assess founders' ability to analyze the state of their business, reading the signals, understanding when is there a market pool? Is there a segment of highly lucrative early adopters on the market? Is there adjacencies where you can scale from there? Because majority of the companies, like if you take ClassPass as an example, ClassPass started from a single zip code in New York City. They started in the zip codes in Midtown Manhattan, and then they went zip code after zip code after zip code, and they scaled from there. And later they entered corporate segment. So you kind of, it's iterative approach into adjacencies. The question becomes, if you're starting from a certain vertical, how many adjacencies are there that you believe you can penetrate, and how big of an opportunity that would represent? So you basically combine your take on the go-to-market strategy with the bottom-up analysis of the customers whose life or business you can touch. And you look from that perspective, not from the total addressable market perspective. Now, in terms of the markets, I like software for plumbers. I really like companies who start really small, but know how to tap into adjacencies. Because if a market is obviously big, it's probably very competitive. So your time to commoditization is much faster than if you start in a certain vertical. And this time to commoditization is very important because the moment you hit the scale at which you compete on the margins, it's not an interesting business from the venture capital perspective.
Outside of your professional life as a venture investor and startup influencer, could you share a personal experience or passion of yours that has significantly impacted your overall growth and development as an individual?
Yeah, I'd say, well, my passion project is my three children. I have three daughters, the age of 7, 9, and 18. And to me, leading by example and being someone who is actually showing the girls that they really don't have any constraints in terms of what they can do, that the biggest constraints are in their minds, and just like keep pushing my own limits for the sake of being that example is something that I do in my spare time for sure. And reading, of course. I read a lot. I read like maybe a book every 2 weeks.
That's really nice. And go, it's all it's great that you're inspiring your daughter.
It's very admirable. Okay, so our final question for today would be, what advice would you have for the students of Entrepreneurship 200 as we take our steps as on our first steps as entrepreneurs or into corporate jobs?
I think the biggest piece of advice is that you are all perfectly positioned to take as much risk as you can. Because for you as, brilliant students, and you all are very brilliant and intelligent, any corporate job, consulting, entry stage venture capital, this all is a safety zone. Like those options will not go away from you anyways. But I think this desire and ability to pursue, we talked about big dreams, to pursue something that seems pretty crazy or seems pretty risky, I think it will never be a better time than after you graduate, because the risk appetite with age, it will diminish. And especially with the community, right now you're in the community of all these people who are doing all these crazy things and so on and so forth. Later in life, you will be more surrounded with a community of people who love stability, who have like established routines and ways of living, and taking the risk and carving out of that community will be much harder. So yeah, I would recommend to think about what is that you really want, not in terms of what is that other people think you need, but what is that what you want, and take this leap of faith on yourself, and take a risk and do something big with your life.
Inspirational. We appreciate that. I would agree with got to take the risks in life and they always pay off. We had a guest speaker not too long ago in my entrepreneurship class, and he was advocating for the same thing. He was saying, you never meet someone who's taken risks and they say they regret it. It always pays off in the end. So I appreciate your philosophy. Well, we really
Yeah.
do appreciate your time and all of the wisdom you're able to share with us today. We had a really great conversation with you, and we hope we have the chance to connect with you again one day in the future.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you for your thoughtful questions. I really appreciate that.